3 something. Start putting some tension on it and see what happens. It's starting to muddle it a little bit. Well, that was crap.
Okay, so I do consider myself a bit of a Nissan Datsun fanboy, so I'm aware that the Datsun name was used by Nissan when they came to the United States. But nevertheless, this is a Datsun, not a Nissan V210, so I wanted to remove that and really just clean up the valve cover in general and do something kind of special with that. But the color, my dad actually suggested orange to match the piping in the seats, and I fell in love with that idea right away. So we found this color from House of Color and decided to go with that. If you know these cars, there actually was a significant amount of trimming done to this valve cover that you'll just never notice because this is the way it should have looked from the factory. Lots of things are missing now that were just making it too busy and too noisy, and I really think that we knocked it out of the park with this one. This piece you see me test fitting here holds my coil conversion that gives me tighter control over the spark and removes all the ugly plug wires from the distributor. Also, I just wanted to plug these t-shirts real quick. I did go ahead and make a print-on-demand service in case you wanted to pick one of these up. It kind of helps me out a little bit. As we get closer to the end, we're just putting a lot of money into things so that we can save some time. The shirts I'm currently wearing did not turn out to be very good quality, so I've done a second batch with a different company, and I've picked up some hats, so if you're interested in that, there'll be a link down below or whatever. You want me to set the dash up?
What do the instructions say?
6-to-1, flat finish and hardener.
Okay. Try it.
Have we used this before?
Nope. And it's only about 40 years old. Does it have a date on it?
So it sounds totally wrong, but I've seen other guys use the wood cutting blades in their Sawzall, and I personally find it clears the chips a lot better than these metal cutting blades. A little counterintuitive, but it works for me. Another thing to think about when you're cutting aluminum is keeping it cool so it doesn't gall up on itself. I used water so that we didn't impregnate the metal with any kind of oil-based product that would react later when we go to paint it. These two ports on the side are the factory temperature sending units, and they are right on the front of the engine with everything else being so clean. We're going to go ahead and relocate these, so they had to come off. You also see that rectangular sticker with that little threaded boss. That is actually to bleed the coolant system, but we are going to use another method for that, so that dude gets filled as well. Just trying to make the front of the engine as presentable as possible because there really isn't a lot of room in the engine bay, so everything already looks cramped. So the smoother and tighter we can make everything, the more it'll look at home. If you've ever tried to smooth out a casting of any kind, you'll know that it takes a lot longer than you think it should, and you go through a lot more materials than you think you should, and you will get metal in places on your body that you think it should not be. So this took me an entire 8-hour day, plus well into the night and the next day, and I still am not done with that. So right here on the front of the intake, it had this relief cut for accessing the bolts that hold it to the lower intake manifold. Well, I guess this is the lower. The upper is underneath it, technically. Anyway, I didn't like the way that looked, and because this manifold's like half an inch thick, I was able just to grind that off. I did all this nonsense outside because, like I said earlier, there's just so much metal. there were some voids left from obviously deleting those temperature sensor units, and some of the bosses for the threaded inserts went a little low. So this was just a process of weld, grind, repeat until all of those areas were flush with the top surface. We are going to paint this, so the top surface does need to be pretty flat, and the flap disc does not do a good job of that. So this rasp was the easiest way to essentially block in preparation for paint, and a quick hit with the DA, we could see what that was going to look like after it was smoothed out. So in the United States in the 70s, they started putting what are colloquially known as park bench bumpers on everything. So the idea was your car could sustain a 5 mile per hour or less accident and not need repairs. This was accomplished by adding shock absorbers to the bumper itself. So the bumpers would kind of spring back, and all the bumpers were gigantic and hideous and ugly. That's why they were called park benches, because they stuck out so far you could essentially sit on them to eat your lunch. But we don't care about safety, so I grabbed the prettiest looking bumper that I could, which was the European style. And this one happened to come from Egypt, and it did not cover the factory shock absorber holes in the rear sill panel. So I'm taking a minute here to cut some metal, and we're going to graft that in. When you grow up in a body shop, these yellow hammers kind of blow your mind as a kid. Like, what in the world are you going to do with this? And this is that use case. You are just bending it. You're not trying to put dings in it. I finally got to use that for the first time in 28 years. It felt really good. So I got this patch in there, a perfect fit all the way around, and go ahead and tacken it up. But as these things go, metal heats up, it starts to warp, and I grew a little bit of a gap here on the left side, but it didn't end up being too big of a deal. This time I learned from my mistake on the side of the car where I deleted the fuel door, and I paid special attention to not heat the metal beyond a reasonable temperature. So I tried the belt grinder at first, but it was just taking too long, so I ended up just using the flap disc and taking long breaks. So the reason I am grinding and then blowing to cool the metal off, the name of the game is not to warp anything. It seemed like it didn't warp while I was welding last time. It really just warped while I was flap disking, but you gotta do it. So I'm trying to keep it cool, taking big breaks. If it gets too hot to touch, then that's too hot. Well, I was worried about not getting enough hardener in it, and I think I may have overdone it a tad. That went off pretty darn quickly. But I guess that's good for us. Means we get to keep working. I also think I may have just a little too much. that's gonna be it for today. This is where we got with the upper intake manifold. We shaved a bunch of bosses, filled some voids that were factory. We went ahead and filled the factory dual temperature control, the thermostat switch, and the thermostat sending unit for the ECU. We're gonna leave the stock fuel rail, but we'll go ahead and clean that up too. Got some work to do to get it sanded down, but this will go painted. And we have our valve cover, which is, this matches the piping on the upholstery. We are finished with what I think is a pretty good looking paint job on that dude. And then my coil bracket, which holds the K-series coils, will get painted the same color as the intake manifold. And we got a pretty trick oil fill cap. We went ahead and shot the dash, because it is textured like the upholstery. We painted it a navy dark blue, similar to the upholstery color. And that way with the dash pad up against it, it just sets it off a little bit. I designed these turn signal buckets to replace the factory turn signals. I'll show you that over here. And I had these 3D printed in aluminum. This is on its way to being polished. And this is what it looks like after it's been sanded for quite a while. We're still gonna hit this on the buffing wheel. That guy will fit right there. And I think that'll look pretty cool. It'll keep us legal. And it also is something I would like to sell on the market as a no-mod solution to all of these side markers and all these different models of Datsun. This would be a unbolt yours, bolt this in, and instantly just step your game up. So that's all we got for today. I don't know. Make sure you're subscribed. Things are about to get crazy. Okay, so it really is crunch time. We have until September 7th to paint the car and put it most of the way together, and then we will be doing the walk around with the judges. In that time, we have to finish all the body work, finish the front and rear bumpers. We have some work to do on the bumper, narrowing the taillight or the license plate section. We need to probably polish and assemble the entire taillight panel. We got to finish the front and rear spoilers. We're gonna shave the engine bay, weld all the plugs in there, go ahead and remove all of the brake lines and things like that. And we'll have to reinstall those before we put the engine back in. But we are also gonna need to finish all the work that is on the engine, polishing the intake upper and lower, the transmission, and pretty much anything that would be harder to do once it's on the car needs to be done before it goes in the car. So lots to do in about 3.5 weeks.